بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق الناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقدار العظيم. For these last 10 nights of Ramadan, inshallah, we'll be reading two letters, one from Shaykh Ahmad Tijani, another from the letters of Shaykh Ibrahim Niyas. This letter of Shaykh Ahmad Tijani, the subject is on the fear of Allah and humility before Him. After invoking the name of Allah and prayers upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to proceed, I counsel you to that which Allah has counseled people. Subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and we have certainly counseled those who were given the book before you and you as well to fear Allah. Surah An-Nisa, ayat 31. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He legislated for you as a religion that to which He exhorted Noah and that which He revealed to you, and that to which we counselled Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa to uphold the religion and not to separate into groups within it. It is difficult for the polytheist. Surah Shura, ayat 13. He, subhanahu wa ta'ala, said, seek protection with the rope of Allah altogether and do not separate into groups. Surah Al-Imran, ayat 103. He, subhanahu wa ta'ala, said, if someone fears Allah, He will grant him a way out, and He will provide for him from which he had not expected. Whoever depends on Allah, He suffices him. Indeed, Allah will accomplish His affair. Allah has given everything its measure. Surah Al-Talaq, ayat 2 and 3. He, subhanahu wa ta'ala, also said, if someone fears Allah, He will grant him ease in his affair. That is the command of Allah which He has revealed to you. If anyone fears Allah, He will cover over them their evil deeds and increase him in reward. Surah Al-Talaq, ayat 4 through 5. Thereafter, you should all know that conscious fear of God has been exceedingly difficult to attain. It has become far too remote for anyone to approach it, let alone embody it completely. All reach it, all ambitions fall short of it. Thus, only the unique, rare person can reach it, due to that which hearts and souls have been sealed of turning away from Allah and His command in every way and form. That state has been so ingrained in the pasture of human situations that there is no way of escaping it. This is the state of all the people of this time from every land upon the surface of the earth, except extremely rare person whom Allah has protected. Shaykh Ahmad Tijani radiallahu anhu continues, because of what we have mentioned, that being that the time that we live in, taqwa of Allah is something almost rare to attain completely. Because of what we have mentioned, the ocean of dismay and trials has swelled. The sea of tribulations and afflictions has overflowed, and people have drowned in it completely. Thus, the situation of the slave has become such that every time he requests salvation from a misfortune and he is protected from it, he is surrounded by misfortunes, meaning that every time the slave seeks refuge from Allah from something that he's going through or some affliction or some misfortune, as soon as he gets free from that, something else is happening, because most of the time misfortunes come about due to our sinful state. About this, the Shaykh said, it has been said, a time will come upon people in which the ocean of trials and tribulations will amass such that the only thing that will benefit is the supplication, like the supplication of a person who is drowning. The Shaykh is saying that this is a saying that a time will come that people will be drowning in so many trials and tribulations. Their dua and their screams and their seeking out help from Allah will be like the man who is drowning in the ocean, seeking from someone to save him. There's no doubt that we're living in this time, how the Shaykh has said. So the Shaykh is saying that this is mostly due to our sinful state. because afflictions and trials mostly come due to a sinful state. The Sheikh continues, so it is imperative to adhere to some matters which will save one from what we have mentioned, or will put out most of its fires. They are: 1. Seeking forgiveness, istighfar. 2. Prayers upon the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. 3. Declaring Tahleel, La ilaha illallah, the invocation of the ayat, there's no God but you, glory be to you, indeed I have been among the oppressors. That verse, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minaz zalimin, which we will find, or invoking the ayat of Allah, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. So the Sheikh is recommending various acts that will save us from what we have mentioned, with people drowning in trials and misfortunes due to our sinful state and not being to be completely immersed in the taqwa of Allah. He's saying it's imperative to adhere to some of these matters that will save us from that most of the time, or put out all of the fires of that situation. 1. Istighfar. 2. Salah ala Nabi. 3. La ilaha illallah. 4. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minaz zalimin. And the last one, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. The Shaykh continues, for these things, according to the frequency and plenitude of your invocation of them, will distance from the slave many afflictions and evil burdens. And according to the scarceness of his invocation of them, his distance will be lessened from those afflictions and evils. Thus, let each of you invoke a portion of these remembrances according to his own possibilities. So the Sheikh is saying the frequency in which we invocate with these things will determine the distance of the slave from these afflictions and trials. The Sheikh continues, you must also frequently humble yourself and supplicate humbly He who possesses perfect might and majesty. For Allah is merciful and loving to his servants. He is more generous and greater in bounty than that someone whom afflictions and distresses have surrounded should humble supplicate him, stretching forth his hand, requesting his favor, and hoping for his grace and generosity, and he will return him empty-handed, or that he will turn him out from his mercy. The Shaykh is saying, if one makes frequent humbling of himself and supplicating for Allah, Allah is too merciful and loving to his servants, and he is more generous than to see someone supplicating and having distresses and afflictions and humbly supplicating to him, stretching out his hands in entreaty and requesting favor and hopes in his grace. He's too merciful and too generous to leave that person empty-handed. The Shaykh continues, and the most incapable person is someone who is incapable of even humbly entreating himself and supplication. This is the most incapable of a person who's unable to supplicate to Allah when he's in a state of need. And if someone deprives himself of Allah, there's no one who can repair him. You should appoint for yourself certain periods of time throughout the passage of the hours and days in which you will stand at the door of Allah. For if someone makes that his habit during the passage of his time, then the mercy and breezes of Allah will cover him in such a way that they will obliterate his afflictions and difficulties, and lightening the weight of the calamitous burdens that weigh heavy on him. For he, subhanahu wa ta'ala, again is rich and generous, and he is too shy due to his generosity when he sees that a slave has repeatedly stood at his door, even for the smallest amount of time, to submit him to afflictions from which he has no escape, or cast him into a disastrous situation from which he would have a difficult time to free himself. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is too rich and too generous, and he is too shy due to his generosity when he sees that a slave has repeatedly stood at his door, even for the smallest amount of time, to submit him to afflictions from which he has no escape, or cast him into a disastrous situation from which he would have a difficult time to free himself. The Sheikh continues, adhere to this commitment and remain in this situation even for the smallest amount of time throughout your days and nights, and you will find ease in all your affairs and safety from many evils. Side note, so there's a verse of Quran that says, remember Allah and remember Allah much. Remember him much. One of the students noticed another place where it was said if you was to worship Allah forever with many people for thousands of years, it would not equal the status of much in the eyes of Allah, because Allah is plentiful, Allah is infinite. So how can there be such a thing as a lot in his eyes? Someone once asked Shaykh Muhammad Mahi Sise this question, and the Shaykh answered that much in the eyes of Allah is what is consistent. Much in the eyes of Allah is not that which is the most numbers. Much in the eyes of Allah is that which is the most consistent, according to what Shaykh Mahi Sise said. And we see that in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that the most beloved thing to Allah is the action that is done the most consistently. So the Shaykh is saying, no matter how much time you have, you should make it upon yourself to have a certain time in which you sit and seek humble treaty supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you adhere to this commitment and remain in that state of submitting to him throughout your days, even for the smallest amount of time, you will find ease in all your affairs and safety from many evils. Shaykh Ahmad Tijani continues, if one is able, he should humbly supplicate every night with this supplication. And he gives this supplication that's found in the books of the Tariqah. It's called Hizbul Tadurui. I will post this dua here. But for the sake of this class, I'll read it in English, and even I will read it and post it. And even when I post it, it is still recommended to seek authorization from those whom you all seek authorization from, your Shaykh or your Muqaddam. This translation is, O Allah, you are the one who moves and makes settle everything that occurs in the universe, both good and bad. By your decree do all matters continue or conclude. In your hand and by your will is the destiny enacted and the destiny decreed. You are more aware of our inability and weakness, as well as the dissipation of our might and power to distance ourselves from what alights upon us of evil, or connecting ourselves to what we want to occur of good, or what suits our purposes and everything. But we have stood at your door, and we have sought refuge at your side, and we have taken our place at your doorstep, seeking your aid to ward off what alights upon us of evil, and what may descend upon us of disaster, and what runs the course of time, the passages of time, that we are incapable of bearing, and the smallest of which we cannot endure, let alone the greatest of it. You are the pardoning and generous, the exalted and merciful, whom no one in need of help seeks help, except that you help them, whom no afflicted person turns towards, complaining of his affliction, except that you relent to him, and whom no person suffering from the pain of his difficulty calls upon, except that relent to him and have mercy on him. And here I stand seeking your aid and taking refuge in you. So have mercy upon my weakness and my humble entreaty to you, and be for me an aid, a secure, and one who pushes away all that should alight upon me of adversities and sorrows. And do not make the vastness of my sins a barrier to that which should descend upon me of your generosity, nor an impediment to what you give us out of your benevolence, and treat us regarding all our sins with your pardon and forgiveness, and in all our mistakes and missteps with your mercy and beneficence. For verily we hope for your grace, depend on your generosity, ask for your favor, and humbly submit to your perfection, honor, and glory. So do not the portion we obtain from you deprivation and disappointment. And we will not by your grace any rejection nor disappointment, because you are the most generous of those at whose door the askers stand, and more glorious than all of those in whom the hopers hope. For verily yours is the greatest grace and the most noble honor, and you are more generous and more glorious than that one seeking help should seek help from you, and you should turn him away disappointed, or that anyone should implore you by your grace through humble entreaty, and that his portion from you should be deprivation. There is nothing worthy of worship except you, O exalted one, O great one, O glorious one, O generous one, O abundant in grace, O kind one, O merciful one. The Sheikh continues, the person should repeat the words, La ilaha illa anta ya aliyu, that's the Arabic version, 20 times, the beginning of it. He should recite Salatul Fatih 10 times each before the recitation of the supplication and after it. If anyone persists in reciting the supplication every night, 7, 5, or 3 times, it will ward off many afflictions and difficulties. And if it were to be necessary that something befall him, a great gentle mercy will descend with it. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.